This is a demonstration of problem P229A, journalizing transactions, posting journal entries to T accounts, and preparing a trial balance. Vincent York practices medicine under the business title Vincent York, MD. During July, the medical practice completed the following transactions, and the problem lists several transactions for the business during July, and it also gives us several accounts that we can use to make the journal entries. So the first part of the problem will involve making the journal entries for July. So on July 1st, York contributed $63,000 cash to the business in exchange for common stock. So to make this entry, we will debit cash for $63,000 and we'll credit common stock for the same amount. The next entry says that we paid monthly rent on medical equipment, $510. So we're going to debit the expense, rent expense, for the $510, and we paid that amount. So we're going to credit cash for that same amount. Then on July 9th, it says that we paid $23,000 cash to purchase land to be used in operations. So land will be our asset that we received for $23,000. And then we're going to credit cash for $23,000 because we actually paid cash for it. Then on the 10th, it says that we purchased office supplies on account for $1,600. So we're going to debit office supplies, which is the asset, for $1,600. And it says that we got the office supplies on account, so we've got an accounts payable that we'll need to pay in the future for the office supplies. Then on the 19th, it says that we borrowed $22,000 from the bank for business use, so we received $22,000, and we're going to have to sign, I'm sure, a notes payable to pay the bank or someone back for that amount in the future. On the 22nd, it said that we paid $1,100 on account, so now we're reducing our accounts payable for $1,100, and we credit cash for the same amount. Okay, and the business received a bill for advertising in the daily newspaper to be paid in August. So this is advertising that we have already received. So we're going to debit our advertising expense for the $240, and we're going to credit, though, advertising payable because we are going to pay this amount in August. Then revenues earned during the month were $6,400. We were paid $6,400 cash and $6,000 on account. So I'm going to debit cash for the amount that we actually received, and I'm going to debit accounts receivable for the amount that we allowed our customers to charge. And then those two amounts added together will be credited to service revenue for $12,400. The next entry says that we paid employee salaries of $2,200, office rent of $1,900, and utilities of $560, and we're going to record this as a compound entry. So we're going to debit salaries expense for the $2,200, rent expense for $1,900, and utilities expense for $560. And then we're going to credit cash for the total of all three of these, which is $4,660. So we can always have more than one debit or more than one credit, but the two sides still have to equal. And that's $4,660. Then it says the business received $1,120 for medical screening services to be performed next month. So we received cash of $1,120, but we have not rendered these services, so we can't record this as service revenue. So we look through the account listing they gave us, and we see that we have the account Unearned Revenue. So that is what we're going to credit for this amount. That is a liability account, and we keep the money in that account until we actually earn it. Then we would debit Unearned Revenue, and we would credit service revenue. The last entry says we paid cash dividends of $7,200, so we're going to debit dividends for $7,200, and we're going to credit cash for $7,200. And that's all of the entries for July. The second part of the problem asked us to post the journal entries to the T accounts using the transaction dates and then label the balance in each account. And I have already completed that portion so I could save us some time. But what you would have done is exactly like we've done in other problems. You just take the debit to cash and you debit that and you record the date. And you do that for each one of those journal entries, and then I determined a balance for each account. And then the third part of the problem wants us to prepare a trial balance for Vincent York, MD, as of July 31st, 2018. So we know when we do our trial balance, we're going to just take the account balances, record them in the debit or the credit column, and make sure that our debits equal our credit. So our first account is going to be cash, which has a debit balance of $56,050. Accounts receivable would be the next account. It has a debit balance of $6,000. Office supplies debit balance $1,600, and land $23,000. So that was all of our assets. Now we're going to go to our liabilities and go to accounts payable, which is a credit balance, and it has a $500 credit balance. And then we're going to advertising payable and record that. It also has a credit balance, of course. And then we have unearned revenue. Remember, that's a liability account until we earn the revenue by performing the services. And then notes payable, which is also a liability, for $22,000. That's all of our liabilities, so we go on to our stockholders' equity accounts and we record our common stock, which has a credit balance of $63,000. And then we go to dividends. We don't have any retained earnings, so we record our dividends in our debit column and start on our revenues and our expenses with service revenue first. And now we're going to record all of our debits for our expense accounts, starting with salaries expense. And then rent expense. Utilities expense. And our last one is going to be advertising expense. And that's our $240. Okay, and when we have completed the trial balance, of course, what we're mostly interested in is these two totals down here. This total represents all of the debit amounts, and this total represents all of the credit amounts. And those two have to equal so that we can prove that our debits and our credits are equal before we begin to do our financial statements. So that is the conclusion of the demonstration for problem 229A.